Hello, everyone. As we are joining here, I just want to thank you for being here. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat as we're allowing people just 15 seconds to log on. Hello, everyone. As you are logging on here, we are going to get started in just about 10 seconds, but please take a moment to go into the chat and introduce yourself so that we can get to know you. All right, we are going to get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's webinar, What's So Important About Puberty Anyways. My name is Joshua Long. I'm the Senior Educational Content Manager here at IYI. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We are grateful to have the chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers who remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those who are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Listed here, you can see our vision that drives the work we do for Indiana youth. And now before we begin, I'm going to share a few pointers that will help you engage with today's webinar. For any technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message and I will assist you. You can use this feature to converse with the group as well. One note with that, when you are submitting a chat to the chat box, make sure that the blue bubble after 2 reads everyone, if you're intending for everyone to see. If you have technical support issues, make sure that it says to hosts and panelists. We also encourage you to ask questions. Please use the Q&A feature for any you may have, and we will get to as many as possible. You're also able to upvote questions that you see that you may want answered as well, and the higher upvoted ones rise to the top. Later today, you will receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's presentation. And if you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk email as it may have been directed there. Once you complete the evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of participation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later or share the opportunity to listen in with partners. We are very excited to welcome our speaker for today because in addition to today's webinar, she is presenting twice at our upcoming National Summit on Youth Wellbeing. This is a new event for us and it is packed with engaging and relevant sessions. And with that, I have provided 2 examples of sessions from the registration website. The first is a session on confronting the loneliness epidemic in youth with Milena Batanova of Harvard. And then another cool one is finding meaning, purpose, and growth through adolescent experiences. And that's with Michael Steger, Director and Professor of Psychology at Colorado State University. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our speaker for today, Dr. Natasha Chaku from Indiana University. Natasha.
Hello, everyone. Just give me 1 second to pull this up for us. All right. It sounds like everyone can hear me and see my slides. I am really, really happy and excited to be here with all of you today to talk to you a little bit in general about puberty and why I'm so interested in puberty, and then also to show you maybe some real life data from kids around our country and how they are experiencing and thinking about puberty. So the title of my talk today is What's So Important About Puberty Anyway? I'm going to talk a little bit about what causes puberty, its correlates and its consequences. And I will note that I will be somewhat monitoring the chat, but Josh has offered to monitor the chat as well. If you have a clarifying question, I'll pause and answer it. If you have a more substantive questions, I'll be sure to leave some time at the end for questions and for discussion as well. Right. Okay, so let me start by telling you first about my favorite period of the lifespan. I'm a developmental psychologist, which means I study change over time, and I primarily do so in adolescence. And this is because adolescence is, I think, this really unique and special period of the lifespan when you are neither a child or an adult. And it's long, I actually think, been posited as this really sensitive period for the development of important social and emotional processes. It's this time of tremendous growth and opportunity that's guided by these rapid and complex neurobiological changes that together rewire this adolescent brain and thrust them into society, really. And what I find so curious about adolescence is that unlike other developmental periods of the lifespan that are primarily, I think, exemplified by growth, adolescence really presents a paradox. It is most often characterized by risk, and researchers and policymakers really focus on these typical or common adolescent deficits, potentially related to delinquent behavior, to risky decision making, and poor health behaviors. Uh, but I will note here that a lot of my work in general and a lot of work that's emerging out of the developmental space really focuses on all of the positive attributes and assets that adolescents have. Adolescents are some of our greatest athletes. I'm reminded of this every couple of years when I watch the Olympics and see our 14, 16, 18, and 19-year-olds triumphing. They are also some of our most forward-thinking activists and advocates for change around the world. And so they really represent this paradoxical moment of development where some are thriving and some are not. And I think there's like really good examples of this that come out of our epidemiological data. So this is some data that I'm showing you coming from the CDC, which conducts every other year this risk surveillance survey. And so they have some data all the way from the late 1980s to currently. And if you look at potentially the last 10 or so years, the last decade, you will notice that our adolescents are less likely than ever before to have tried or be using a cigarette. They are less likely to endorse drinking alcohol. They're also less likely to report sexual initiation or having sex in high school. So they're improving on a bunch of these health behaviors. And this is where people in my field and people who work in health psychology or at our School of Public Health across the way, we'd be giving each other high fives. We'd be sort of walking around like we did this great thing, like we had excellent public health messaging, like parents and teachers or educators, they're keeping a closer eye on our like most risky youth. So we see some positive change in adolescence, particularly related to health behaviors. And over the same exact period of time, we are also seeing these persistent increases in how our youth are feeling. So more and more so, and you see it for both boys and girls, though more so for girls than boys, youth are reporting feeling persistently sad or hopeless or experiencing suicidal ideation. And these two processes, this benefit you see in health behaviors, this detrimental increase in their mental health problems are happening at the same time. And I think this really highlights sort of this key question of adolescence, like why do some kids do well and why don't others? A lot of my research is sort of focused on identifying for whom and when and how these processes occur. And I'll say that most of it really does focus here on puberty. Most of my work actually looks at how the experience of puberty, how youth perceive it, how others perceive them going through puberty, how those processes are associated with health and well-being. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about puberty, what it is, how it occurs, And then I'm going to show you some evidence from a couple of different studies that have happened in my lab that are also supported by work that's happening in other places around the country that can give us some insight into like what is it about puberty that might be causing more positive or more negative outcomes. So let me start by just telling you overall, like what is puberty? So you can follow Anne here from her childhood to her adulthood. And if you zoomed in on Anne during her adolescence, you would find that Anne is experiencing some dramatic and nonlinear changes in her body size and shape. And I do mean that these changes are dramatic, and I do mean that they're nonlinear. When a child goes through puberty, the first thing to grow is their nose and their fingers and their toes. And then after that, you start to see some changes in their face, in their limbs, and that all contributes this sometimes like gawky appearance that happens right at the beginning of adolescence. Sometimes they get a lot more clumsy, they get a lot more uncomfortable maybe in their body because of these big and dramatic changes in their height and their weight. Those are primarily driven by a surge or increase in sex hormones. Those are primarily DHEA and estradiol in girls, and DHEA and testosterone in boys, though both sexes have all three hormones, and they eventually lead to the maturation of secondary sex characteristics. And if that's all that puberty was, I would probably work in a biology department, not a psychology department. I really feel like though puberty is this biological hallmark of adolescence, it's infused with social and psychological significance. Its occurrence provokes this internal psychological response. Children start to view themselves differently. They look in the mirror and maybe for the first time, they may not recognize exactly who's standing in front of them. It provokes them to start thinking about who they are and who they are in relation to other people. And at the same time, it provokes a social response from the environment. And by that, I mean that parents see the beginning of puberty and its progression as a way to tell that their child is sort of entering or beginning to emerge as an adult. Educators and teachers and other people who work with youth also view this as like a special time period. So now all of a sudden, I've had parents say, it's like I woke up one morning and there was a stranger in the house with me. All of a sudden, a mom told me yesterday, I went with my child to the dermatologist and they took off their shirt and I saw all this underarm hair. And I was like, where did that come from? So sometimes it happens and occurs really dramatically, not only for the child themselves, but also for the adults around them in their environment. And so the child is interpreting sort of the changes that are happening for them and also how those changes are provoking this response from their environment. And puberty, I'll say, for most people, really marks the beginning of adolescence, this like hard physical boundary between childhood and the teen years. And I think this is a nice sort of boundary between childhood and adolescence for a couple of reasons. That's because pubertal onset is sort of universal and discontinuous. And by that, I mean, puberty happens, it's a normative developmental process. Most youth experience it. It does result in these dramatic and sometimes sudden changes in growth, which makes it really easy for parents and children themselves to identify when it occurs. And many aspects of puberty are really visible. So your body literally changes shapes. It starts to look more like an adult body. And this can sometimes be a little complicated, I think, for parents in particular, because pubertal onset is changing and has changed generationally over time. I think our most recent estimates suggest that pubertal timing is moving forward by about 3 months every decade. And you can see that, I think, sort of descriptively in these two images I've popped up on the board, on the PowerPoint here. And it's showing evidence from about the 1830s all the way to 2010. And then if you zoom in here, you have some recent evidence as well that across a bunch of Westernized European and US or North American countries, there's been this decline at the time point of which boys and girls start puberty. And I'll say that this decline that you see from the 1830s to about like the 1950s, maybe even the 1970s, I think is good evidence of better nutrition. So as the world industrialized and as the world got better at getting access, at getting young kids access to more nutritious and calorie dense food, the age of puberty dropped. So less or fewer kids are hungry. I generally view this large and dramatic early drop in onset of puberty as something that's really good. It's good evidence that fewer children are hungry and more kids have access to calorie dense food. The real question that folks are struggling with, and I will provide you some evidence in just a bit on pubertal onset and why it might be sort of being pulled earlier, is like what's happening from maybe the 1950s and the 1970s on. You see like a less dramatic drop in pubertal timing, like when puberty occurs, but it seems to still be dropping. And I think that's where a lot of interesting work is happening on like what are the causes of that continued sort of decline in when kids start puberty. So they're starting earlier and earlier, which might be pulling the age of adolescence down. So now potentially you might be starting puberty as early as 10 or 9 or 8. And what does that mean? I'll also say, and one of the things we'll talk about quite a bit, is that there is a lot of variation in onset in when you start puberty. So for example, breastfeeding or the development of your breast is one of the first signs of puberty in young girls, and it can start as early as 8 or as late as 13 and still be considered normative, on time, or typical development. Similarly for boys, I think the growth spurt is one of like the key or most salient aspects of puberty in boys, and that can start as early as 12 and it can start as late as 17. Those boys are still what we would consider typically developing or normatively developing. And so we start to see as we age almost a decoupling of our development with our age. And I'm going to show you some examples of what that might look like. This sort of individual variation, this idea that people can start puberty at different ages is typically known as timing or pubertal timing. And so I'm going to give you an example here. Like you can zoom in on Anne here at age, for example, 11. And now you can compare Anne to her friends Jill and her friend May. And if you looked at her friends and her all at the same age, maybe in the same classroom, like potentially sharing like many of the same activities, you would find that they're at different points of puberty. And in fact, like May seems to be developing earlier than Jill, and Jill seems to be developing earlier than Anne. And we would call May sort of like an early developing girl. Jill would be on time, and Anne would actually be a later developing girl. And these aren't just sort of like things we find in our research, but you can like walk into any classroom, you can walk down the street, and you will see these differences in development are just evident like everywhere you might walk in real life. And I have two examples of that for you here. The first is of triplets on their first day of school. These are my neighbors, and they gave me permission to use this picture. So these are people who are born on the same day, have the same parents, and you can see that even these three have sort of different stages of development. There are different points of puberty, even though they're the same age and they're all going to school on the same day. You can also walk into a classroom. So here is sixth grade lunch. This was sent to me by a friend who is a teacher. And if you really peer in here, like you would notice that there are some young girls here who look quite a bit more developed or more mature than some boys off to the side, and even this young girl who's sitting just a couple seats down. So these sort of differences in maturation emerge in a lunchroom. You can see them in any classroom. Teachers report noticing differences in physical development in schools, as do parents. One of my favorites is if you can really peer off to the back here, you'll see two boys who are standing next to each other, and you can really see the difference that's happening at the same age. Like one young boy is like clearly in the middle of or completing his growth spurt, and one has not started yet. So you're seeing these like sometimes extreme, but clearly visible differences in rate of maturation and when kids mature. So I want to talk first a little bit about what causes pubertal timing. There's been a lot of work done on early life experiences and pubertal timing. So I think some like plausible explanations here can include genetics. So early developing women tend to have early developing girls. This is incredibly plausible. It seems like somewhere between 50 to 80% of when you might start puberty is genetically determined. So the best predictor of when you start puberty is when your mom or dad started puberty. That still leaves like quite a bit of variation to uncover, and we still see this like persistent decline in pubertal onset over time. And I think there are some significant questions on whether this is related to nutrition. For example, I told you a couple slides ago that I think that the decline from the 1800s to the 1950s is primarily driven by an increase in nutritionally dense food. And I think that increase in nutritionally dense or calorie dense food can cut both ways. So it means that fewer kids are hungry. It also means that more and more kids are overweight or indeed obese. And we know that fat cells carry this hormone called leptin, which is related to early pubertal timing. I will also say there's a lot of work going on in sort of what you might call early life adversity or an adverse childhood experiences. Those are really in the realm of father absence from the household or different types of environmental exposures. The one that comes up a lot is hormones and milk that might be linked to earlier timing. The one we're gonna focus on here is actually father absence. And I'll say that's because father absence seems like a potentially modifiable factor for sort of delaying the start of puberty. I will also say that in giant meta-analyses and in other sort of like systematic reviews, which pull estimates from many, many studies, father absence seems to emerge as the most consistent predictor of earlier timing, especially in girls. And I think that for, maybe many reasons, like as something we would say to families or as something I would say to you all or to other educators, this is really like unsatisfying because it doesn't tell us like what it is about father absence, or like what father absence might mean for a family. And I also think father absence is really complicated. So like, for example, uh, you might find at age 3, we have a family, and indeed 2 families here, our pink and orange family, that have dads are present in the household with mom, and we have a yellow family in which it's just mom and the child. And if we just assess them at that point, that would be our conceptualization of the family structure. We know, though, that families change dynamically over time. For example, if at age 5, we might find that the pink family, dad is no longer in the house, but in the yellow family, the same situation is occurring. But in the pink family, we find that like mom and dad spend equal time in the house, but not together. And then potentially at age 9 in the pink family, dad returns to the household. We still have that persistent absence in the yellow family. And then potentially dad is no longer spending as much time with the child at age 9 in that orange family. So we have these different constellations of families that emerge and unfold over time that we don't really account for in a lot of our science. And you can actually look at that. So this is data from the Future of Family Studies. This is a sample of around the 1,200 children who were born to predominantly single mothers, and then assessed first at birth, and then year 1, year 3, year 5, year 9. Those kids have continued to be assessed. They're now in their early 30s. And so we can track them longitudinally over time to look at sort of long-term effects uh, of early life experiences on future development. And here you can see that we have a bulk of kids who were born to 2-parent households, and then persisted to be in 2-parent households over time. That's sort of signified by these blue blocks, where dads are present in the household. You can see that we have sort of like a second sample here of dads who were not present in the household and at birth, and a chunk of those dads continued to be not present over time. But I'll note here that there is some variation that occurs, right? So some dads were not present at birth, but moved into the household at year 1 or year 3 or year 5 or even year 9. There's also a chunk of dads here who are from birth to year 1 moving out of the household. And the biggest chunk, I would say, is happening between birth and year 1. That's not really surprising. If you look at family structure, you would find that sort of like the times of most stress might be right after a child is born, or during that first year or first couple of years. And so that might be most likely when a relationship might break apart. And so you can see some variation across time. And my grad student looked at a lot of this, and then looked at how father absence then was associated or predicted pubertal onset. So how likely a child was to be in puberty at age 9 here. And so I'm going to show you some graphs, and I will do some explaining of them here. She looked at 4 different patterns of father absence. Again, really capitalizing on this idea that father presence is dynamic. It might shift over the child's early life. And so you see here that there are like a bulk of dads who are consistently absent. Across this x-axis, you have sort of percent of dads who were sort of present in their child's life at birth from year 1 all the way to year 9. And you can see there's really low percentage of father presence across all of these time points in class 1.
Dr. Chaku, there's a question in the chat here.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the Y axis is measuring?
Yeah. So here it's measuring percent of fathers who are present in the household. So for example, in class 1, right over here, oops, you see that like the estimates are really low. So that's probably around like, I want to say like 5 to 10% are present in the household at birth. That goes to almost 0%. There's a slight increase in father presence at year 9 for this like class in which dads are completely absent generally. There seem to be other classes that like are also capturing different patterns of absence. For example, in class 2, you have dads that are relatively lowly present. So these are about 150 dads who like maybe 25% of them are absent or present in the household at birth. It dips, but then they really do return to the house. So they're almost 100% of them in this class are present in year 5 and year 9. You then have almost the inverse of that class, like dads who are fairly likely to be present early on. So around 75% of them are present at birth in year 1, and then that really dips across time. So these are dads who are sort of around and available in the first couple years of life, but then leave the household. And then you have another sort of about 1,000 dads who are consistently present across their child's sort of childhood. And then we can look at how that is related to phalarchy. That is our scientific term for breast budding, so that first sign of puberty. And so here you see that in classes where dads were consistently absent, or, and I find this really interesting, absent early but not later, girls were much, much more likely. They had a 50% chance of experiencing breast budding. So they were likely to have started puberty at age 9. That percentage is much lower in classes where dads were consistently present, or in classes where they were present early but then later absent. So there's something really key and helpful about dads being present in the household, especially early in life, for girls' pubertal onset. So they're less likely to go through puberty early or at age 9 if dads are present in the household. We can do the same exact analysis for boys. And so here we have the exact same classes where dads are consistently absent across time, where they're absent early but present later, where they are sort of present early but later absent, and then where they are consistently present. And here you see facial hair is our pubertal outcome. Facial hair at age 9 would be expected to be relatively low. That's why all these percentages are so small and close to 0. And you see, I'll say like the same exact effect for these consistently absent boys, like boys whose fathers are consistently absent are more likely to report having facial hair growth. These are low percentages, but that's like a fairly advanced sign of puberty. And so at age 9, that would mean you're quite an early developer. You'll also see that here that there is some sort of protective effect for boys. When dads are absent early, but they come back to the household, they actually they actually are less likely to start puberty early. So we were hoping to find that in the girls too, right? That, like even if dad is absent early, if he comes back, that might delay pubertal onset. And we found that for the boys, that like something about coming back into the household might be really protective for boys, even if it's not protective for girls. So I think there is something really key about father absence here for delaying onset. And it is likely related to a set of psychosocial experiences that might be associated with father absence early in the life lifespan. For example, in a single parent household, financial or household finances might be tight. There might be more issues with family mental health. The parent relationship might be more fractured. The father might not be spending as much time with their child. Those are all sort of maybe like key mechanisms we think that link father absence to earlier timing. It also, I think, is something that is potentially modifiable. That is, unlike potentially removing environmental exposures, which should be done, but is maybe not something that I personally could do. We can create interventions and programs, especially for young children, to increase the quality of the father-child relationship. We can create programs that support dads spending more time with their children, especially early in life, which could potentially have these pretty dramatic effects on their own development. So you might be wondering why I even care about when kids go through puberty. So what is it about puberty that matters for outcomes? I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what we see or what happens when kids develop early and what happens when they develop late. This is data that is coming from this large national study on adolescents. It's typically known as the Ad Health Study. And I'm going to tell you first about wave one, in which participants were between grades like 7 to 12 or like somewhere between ages 11 to 20. So these youth, around 20,000 of them, were first asked a question on their development. This is what we might call like a subjective pubertal development question. They were asked like, did you start developing earlier, later, or around the same time as your peers? And this is a really nice way actually to assess puberty and pubertal timing, because it may not just be that like biologically or in terms of pubertal milestones you're ahead of your peers, but it may also be that you perceive yourself as being different than your peers, either as someone who's developing quite a bit earlier or quite a bit later. And we found that generally like that perception of yourself as someone who's an early developer or a later developer has all sort of links with future outcomes. We looked here then at their depressive symptoms, their antisocial behavior, a number of health outcomes, so their number of sex partners, drug use, physical activity, screen time, and sleep, as well as a number of physical health outcomes such as self-reported good health and body mass index. And so functionally at wave one, like when they were in their adolescence, we looked at how pubertal timing, whether you described yourself as early, on time, or late, was related to these indicators of psychosocial well-being, your health, and your health behaviors and your physical health. So let me orient you to this graph once again. Here on the x-axis, we have our outcomes. This is depressive symptoms, antisocial behavior, sex partners, drug use, physical activity, screen time, sleep, good health, and BMI. These orange indicators here are our early developers. And in blue, we have our late developers, and they're all being compared to the on time or normally developing youth. And so numbers above zero, symbols above zero that don't cross zero are significantly different. So for example, here, this finding for depression suggests that in adolescence, kids who develop early and kids who develop late are reporting more depressive symptoms. You see some interesting effects for the rest of these outcomes as well. Primarily, you see that girls who develop early also report more antisocial behavior. They tend to report having more sex partners. They tend to report using more drugs. And they also tend to report having higher BMI. So across like a range of sort of mental health outcomes and across physical health, we see this detrimental effect for young girls who develop early. We also see some, but fewer effects for our young girls who are developing late. Again, sort of an increased risk of depression. But then we actually see potentially some protective effects, right? So our young girls who develop late are less likely to report antisocial behavior. They're less likely to report drug use, and they have a lower BMI. So there's some protective effects for these late developers. These outcomes up here are the same exact outcomes, but now showing them for boys. Like the mechanisms that cause puberty tend to be different for boys and girls, and thus we tend to measure them differently. So no effect for depressive behaviors here, but there is this strong effect for early developing boys. They tend to report more antisocial behavior, more sex partners, and more drug use. This is pretty similar to the girls' results. Similarly, they also report sort of higher BMI. And you again see maybe like fewer protective effects for boys. You primarily see that those late developing boys report lower BMI. So I think there's some evidence here that for both early developing boys and girls and for late developing boys and girls, there might be some negative psychosocial and even health-related consequences. And importantly, I think this is only measured during the adolescent period. And I think it's really key for us to understand what effects actually persist into adulthood. So another way of talking about that might be like, what about puberty persists? Like, what about it is actually important for outcomes? Is it just a momentary disturbance that occurs just during adolescence and most kids sort of end up having positive experiences as adults, or are these persisting negative consequences? And we can actually do that in Ad Health because it collected data longitudinally. And so now those participants are in their 30s and 40s. And we can add on to our analytic plan by asking and looking at those same outcomes when they're 30 years old. So now we're looking at like, how does pubertal timing affect sort of psychosocial outcomes and health in adolescence, and then how does it do so in adulthood? And here you see that like most links are generally attenuated. These are, again, those same outcomes in girls. The effects that you really see persist are effects on depressive symptoms for both early developers and late developers. So they tend to be more depressed even in young adulthood. There seem to be some persisting effects on sex partners and on drug use, especially for our early developers. And there is this persistent and strong effect on BMI. So our early developing girls have much higher body mass index than on time or late developing girls. Effects also almost completely disappear in adulthood for boys. Again, the only persistent effect you see is again on BMI, that these early developing boys tend to have higher BMI, especially compared to our late developing boys. So in adulthood, the key things that seem to persist, the key things it seems like we should focus on really do include sort of this objectively reported BMI. There's also evidence, especially for girls, for depression and drug use. And I'll say here, what's really key, I think, about depression and BMI is that those are real markers of adult disability. In fact, I think they're the two biggest markers of adult disability. And thus, like, we could look at some of the negative consequences of pubertal timing, and especially early pubertal timing, as things that just occur in adolescence, that things that might sort of attenuate or come back to normal as kids age, but there are like some or a few like persisting effects. And so I want to end really briefly just talking a little bit about a couple of things we didn't touch on, but probably likely matter. The first is this idea of asynchrony, the idea that you might develop, or parts of your body might develop at different paces during adolescence. And I have an example here. This is sorry. This is on the pubertal development scale, where 1 is has not started puberty and 4 is completely mature. And you see like one girl in blue who is relatively synchronous, like she's developing at about the same pace. And you see another girl right next to her who is kind of all over the place in terms of her own development. And that can contribute to a really gawky appearance in adolescence that is linked to higher rates of victimization and social exclusion. We could also measure not just like the age at which you go through the start puberty. And so here we have sort of age on our x-axis and pubertal statuses on our y-axis, where 1 is prepubertal and 5 is reproductively mature. And a lot of interesting work has just emerged looking at the slope or the progression through puberty. And there's some interesting work that is suggesting that it may not be when you start, but it might be how fast you actually progress through it. And you can imagine a kid who goes through a number of pubertal changes that are very compressed, so very rapid. And you can meet those kids in real life. Those are the kids who wake up in the morning who says, my back hurts, like their bones are literally aching or straining at the rate of how quickly they're growing. And it might be that when those changes are really compressed, that is what it is about puberty that can be really detrimental for outcomes. It likely also matters for other outcomes as well. There's been a lot of work on like cognition and achievement. We know that adolescence is a time period when kids see major drops in reading and math scores. These sort of drops in achievement and motivation tend to be worldwide. They tend to start at the beginning of middle school, which is right around when kids start puberty. APA has a term for it called middle school malaise, which suggests that like, oh, this like switch from elementary to middle school happens to coincide with puberty. Like, what role could puberty play? And like, if you look here, and here I'm just going to show you at this very last minute here, just like some evidence for girls and boys who develop early. And here I have at the end of high school for girls, like their class rank and their grades. And girls who develop early have a higher class rank and they tend to have higher grades. But then when you come back to them in their adulthood, so when you go back when they are 30 years old and you ask about their salary and educational achievement, those positive effects on grade and rank have disappeared for these for these early developing girls. And they actually have lower salaries and lower educational attainment. That is not true for boys. There seems to be some positive effect here for boys on items related to achievement. So they have higher class rank and higher grades at the end of high school. And those translate, as we wouldn't expect, into higher salary and higher educational achievement. So there's just a ton more work to be done on puberty and its links with achievement and cognition and how those links might change or attenuate over time. So I'll leave you here with some final like implications. I'll stress again that puberty is really a biopsychosocial process. By that, I mean that its occurrence is primarily physiological, but it's interpreted and examined really through your psychological lens and your social context. How you experience puberty likely does matter for your well-being and health, and maybe even your achievement and future behaviors, uh, not just in adolescence, but likely in your adulthood as well. And I think that science-based puberty education that normalizes the pubertal process for young boys and girls uh, is really necessary and really helpful. But we all play an important role in helping young people sort of understand and interpret the changes that they're experiencing as they move through puberty. All right, I'm going to end
Great.
there and open it up for questions.
Yeah, we do have some time for questions. I actually am gonna kick it off with a question of my own. Can you go back to the previous slide really quick?
Yeah, this one.
So when you talk about science-based puberty education, do you know of any research or like effects of young girls or boys that may have had education versus not had education, or do you know of any resources for the folks in the audience to provide science-based puberty education?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of emerging evidence that suggests that some of the negative consequences that arise from puberty are hormonally driven. So changes in circulating estradiol may be linked with changes in depression and especially sex specific changes in depression. But there's much more work that suggests that whether you have negative consequences from being an early developer just depends on your social environment. That is like whether you've received education that suggests that puberty is a normal developmental process that young people go through at different times and experience in different ways, and whether like your parents and the other people in your close environment are aware of that as well. So that suggests to me that uh, like good puberty education, like as it takes place in schools or as it takes place in the community, could be like a really key mechanism for helping kids who might be developing early or may have not started developing yet feel like what they're experiencing is normal and shouldn't be pathologized. So there are tons of really great resources. Um, I think the Center for the Developing Adolescent is one website at Berkeley that has some great resources. There are a couple other uh, centers, I believe, at the University of Illinois and at the University of Austin that also have like really great educational materials. I believe the University of Austin and the University of Illinois might also have options that are directed particularly at uh, Chicano or Hispanic or Latinx communities as well. And I am also happy to maybe like send you an email with like a list of those.
Yeah, if you send that to me, Dr. Chaco, I can make sure that's included in the email out to everyone. I also I linked the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent in the chat. There's a question in the Q&A function that I'm going to go ahead and read. What research do you have on non-binary and intersex kids experiencing puberty?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I will say that there's not much. So I will tell you about what I know. First, I will say that uh, the physiological experience of puberty, especially for non-binary kids, is likely really similar. So there is likely not differences in when they start or in the physical or biological milestones of puberty. The differences occur in how they interpret and experience puberty itself. So for like non-binary and intersex kids, this might be the moment. I say might because some kids know earlier and some kids know later. But this might be the moment in which they look at their own body and realize that it is not aligned with how they feel or the gender they think they are. And that typically causes a lot of distress. So the kind of like the gold standard of care for those kids would generally to be or go on some sort of puberty blocker in consultation with a clinician as they work to sort of figure out their next steps. There's been just a little bit of work done on kids who go on puberty blockers. That work typically, as far as I know, suggests that it reduces quite a bit of the distress that's associated with these changes in their body that they don't identify with. So in general, kids who go on puberty blockers are much less likely to experience suicidal ideation or other sort of negative mental health outcomes. I hope that answered most of your question.
For sure. Next question. You mentioned how adverse childhood experiences or ACEs may potentially affect puberty. Can you just give a little bit more detail or information related to that if you have it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of work in the space, and I will say first that effects are generally small and not specific. And by that I mean, I think we use a lot of small samples, and most of pubertal timing is genetically determined. So it's really trying to hunt around for an effect. The mechanism by which this occurs, though, which this might occur, does seem pretty clear. So the first year of life in particular, physiologically, there's a lot of change in our HPG or our puberty axis, as well as our HPA or our stress axis. So those two axes, those two hormonal axes, which together sort of control reproduction and also control stress, are developing during especially the first year of life. And like we might refer to that first year of life, like the development of the HPG axis as mini puberty. So if you had an infant, you might have noticed, for example, some baby acne that's represented or represents that surge of sex steroid hormones. And you might also notice during that same first year of life that your baby who starts and is initially like very reactive and easily stressed out, as in cries a lot, is quickly and learns to be quickly soothed by you, right? They learn to be regulated. That is due to this sort of regulation and remodeling of the stress axes. And I'm talking a lot about this first year of life and the remodeling of these two axes because we think that the dysregulation of either of those two axes is what leads to earlier puberty down the line. And so this is really, really hard to study because we need good evidence of adverse childhood experiences, and we also need like some evidence of hormonal changes, and those can be really tricky to gather in kids between the ages of 0 to 1. But that is the hypothesized mechanism, that sort of the dysregulation of the stress response and in concert the dysregulation of the pubertal axis due to adverse childhood experiences, whether those are related to like, oh, I hate this word, but like less sensitive caregiving. And I'm not a huge fan of it because I think it puts a lot of onus on parents to be really, really sensitive caregivers of their children, which we hope and expect them to be. But oftentimes parents are experiencing some adversity themselves, which makes them less sensitive. So potentially they are working a lot more to try to bring income into the household. Potentially that is like shift work, which means they're not at home with their kids as much, or can't be as available to their kids as much as they would want to be. And they themselves are experiencing, I think, quite a bit of stress. So that would be, I think, like that stress is probably the likely mechanism here.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so that concludes our Q&A session. And so Dr. Baku, I just want to thank you for being here again as I close out. So as we are closing out today, I'm going to speak just briefly again about our National Summit for Youth Wellbeing, where Dr. Chaku will be speaking twice. Please consider joining us for the National Summit on Youth Wellbeing, a virtual summit hosted by the Indiana Youth Institute. It's all about tackling the big challenges facing today's youth. If you're passionate about creating spaces where all kids can thrive, this summit is for you. Similar to the beginning of the webinar, I'm just going to give an example of two more sessions from the summit. The first is from Dr. Radlauer. You might recognize her as one of our keynotes from this past Kids Count conference, and she is presenting on Alpha Gen and Third Space, finding youth well-being in shared places. And then Dr. Seth Swari from Henry Ford Health will be presenting on the connection between youth sports and youth well-being, which seems pretty interesting. Additionally, we have one more webinar in this fiscal year's webinar series through professional education, and that is AI's impact on online youth harassment. That's with Dr. Jess Hader of Parkview Health. Finally, the best way to keep in touch with us, receive all the latest updates, and see all the events that we have coming up is to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can subscribe using the QR code or at IYI.org/newsletters. As we conclude, I sincerely want to thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your impact, voice, and choice to learn and partner with us. Later today, you will receive an email that includes a copy of the presentation and a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's presentation, and upon completion, you will be redirected to your certificate of completion. If you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk as it may have been directed there. That concludes our presentation, and on behalf of Indiana's youth, thank you again for showing up today and every day for Indiana youth.